What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He's Josh. We got Jays Jumpers, Jaron Jackson Jr.'s, John Morantz, Joe Johnson's, Ja Refs. Of course, we've got Jays. We got him for days. Josh, how you doing?
We got to talk about the highlight of the college basketball night last night. Did you see this?
No. I watched no college basketball last night.
Oh, I was certainly. I mean, this occurred at the Duquesne Loyola Chicago game. As you know, everybody in the country was tuned into that one.
Right. I do know what you're about to say. Right.
So it appears it was a prank.
Yeah, the guy was wearing a microphone.
Microphone, yeah. Just rolling out there with, I think it was an Uber Eats order. I saw somebody saying it was DoorDash. I don't know. Just rolling on. I have a little bit fewer questions now that it's pretty clear it seems to be a prank.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I still want to know, where did this idea come from? I want to know the backstory and the execution. I want to still know how he got onto the court.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I still want answers.
You know, I'm sure, like, with all due respect to Duquesne versus Loyola Chicago, it's probably about as easy to walk onto the court at Duquesne versus Loyola Chicago as it is to walk on the court at a high school basketball game. Like,
right.
Nobody's paying attention. With all due respect to both of those teams in the A10. I'm gonna be honest with you. It's the wrong morning for me to be talking about something stupid because, like find something more important to do with your life. Like, and that's coming from a person who has chosen trying to get people to care about what I write and say as a profession. Like the nuts and bolts of what we do, that's what it is, right? It doesn't matter what we say if nobody cares. And so, like, I understand the got to do something to get people to pay attention, but I also don't understand the I'm just going to do something that makes me look like an absolute moron. And so, yeah, that one's new. Like, I guess whoever was at the board meeting to come up with that idea deserves a little bit of credit because that's a pretty good one. But I would be curious. Did he just walk through the front gates with a DoorDash order? Were they like I don't understand how you even get through the front doors where they're like, you can't bring food. And it's like the movie theater. If I walked up to the movie theater with a McDonald's bag, the movie ticket guy wouldn't let me in. I can't imagine. Did he just find a back door? Was he already there before? Was he like camping out? Like, I don't understand. Anyways.
Yeah, that's the part of it that, like you said, I mean, I can't imagine it was that difficult to just get onto the court once you're in the building.
Yeah.
But there's something that has to be planned here. I am kind of curious.
Maybe there's a like a smoking door. You know, that like at a lot of places you can like go right outside the arena in a fenced in area and to smoke. At least there used to be. At least at the FedEx Forum, where you can do that, it wouldn't be all that hard to get somebody to hand you food like over the railing. So maybe it was something like that. Maybe one of the players was in on it and they just brought the food in on their own. I don't actually think that's the case, but wouldn't that be quite the conspiracy theory that in the next 24 hours it comes out that Duquesne's, preferred walk-on was part of the whole shtick. That would be entertaining. I'd be there for that for sure.
Just since this has become such a big deal, whether it should or shouldn't, I feel like we need to get this thing to its conclusion, and we need some answers eventually.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Alrighty, Big 12 SEC Challenge this weekend. A nice, and I don't even know if nice is the right word because the conference schedule has been pretty fun this year. So it's not like it's a break that I need, but it's still fun to get a day of basketball between two conferences that you're otherwise not going to get until the NCAA tournament. And that's what we have in the Big 12 SEC Challenge this weekend. I think it's fun that all of the games are on Saturday. Like the ACC Big 10 Challenge is kind of stretched out across a few days. Yeah. The Big East Big 12 Challenge, I believe, is the same way. I I think it's kind of fun that, starting at noon, you get a game, and then all of them are over by 8 o'clock. And I'm not really sure why I think that is fun, but it kind of mirrors the chaotic mess that is like the first round of the NCAA tournament. You're trying to keep up with everything, and
that's exactly what I was going to say. That's why it's fun. I think you answered your question.
And then, similar to, not exactly the same, but like if Kansas is at Kentucky, and if like the two conferences are tied at 8 o'clock when the last two games are starting, that can be fun as well. Not that anybody is really all that locked into who actually like keeping up in real time with who won it. And if one conference wins but they lose the four biggest games against the best teams in the other conference, then you can still walk away it being a net negative for your conference, even if you actually ended up winning 6 out of the 10 games. But anywho, I'm looking forward to it, and welcome the small hiatus from conference basketball for 12 hours on Saturday afternoon.
Can I throw one suggestion or idea at you that's not even mine?
Of course. Of course.
I heard Chris Spatola talking about this during the Iowa State-Kansas State game, and I wholeheartedly agree. What we need to do moving forward, you block the day out, you decide which teams are participating, right? Because you can't have every SEC team participate. And then you wait until at least January to actually decide who's playing who. So that when you have Iowa States and Kansas States who are having phenomenal seasons, and an Arkansas team that's banged up, whereas Alabama might be the best team in the country, you can line this up better so that now Kansas, Kentucky, I'm sure we're going to talk about it, is fascinating for different reasons. But this could have been phenomenal with how good the top of these conferences are. But when you do this at the beginning of the season and you have it all planned out, sometimes you swing and miss on the predictions, and so you don't get as many high-profile matchups where you've got the best teams at the top of these conferences going against each other, because we have one of those, basically. Mm-hmm. And then you've got a bunch of games where a really good team is playing a good team. But I would have loved to see this get into it, and I don't know how feasible it would be, but I heard Spatola mention that, and I wholeheartedly agree. We got to line this thing up once we know who's good and kind of how the season's going for everybody.
I'm going to respectfully disagree.
Okay.
I think taking away bubble teams' possible opportunities to get a really good NCAA tournament when just because they aren't as good as some of the other teams in the conference is jeopardizing the spirit of college basketball. So I will respectfully disagree. We get plenty of other good matchups, and even though they swung and missed on some things here, I mean, Missouri has smoked Kentucky this year. It's not like Iowa State's going to walk into Missouri and win necessarily. Right. So I will respectfully disagree. I think the matchups look fine, despite the fact that the best teams aren't playing each other. But I would also argue, and maybe that's an incorrect argument, but like I don't think is that really the spirit of this contest for the best teams in both conferences to play each other? Because if it was, then they would do that. They would just say, okay, you're going to play at some point on Saturday. I mean, and you'd be able to know way earlier than, your NCAA tournament game the next weekend,
right.
Like it could be 2 weeks. So I don't know. I'm fine with it. And it can be an opportunity for a conference to like strengthen itself a little bit or not strengthen itself a little bit. And part of that comes with beating the teams you're supposed to if you're a good team. And so I understand the idea, but I will respectfully disagree that needs to happen.
And I think that's something that's kind of right up my alley, right? It's this idea of, we got a bunch of, and we're going to talk about this, right? A bunch of huge games for bubble teams. Mm-hmm. I'm all here for that. I'm not sure it's actually the best thing for this event in terms of publicity, but then, right, like you said, you can argue, okay, what is the actual purpose? The one counter I would bring to that is because I'm with you that, right, I don't necessarily mean we just line them up 1 through 10 and just play 1 versus 1, 2 versus 2, etc. But if you're Iowa State, if you're Kansas State, now maybe you argue, look, we just want a breather from the Big 12 because we're playing, 7, 8 of the best, 20, 30, 35 teams in the country, consistently. But this idea of you're gonna tend to have Kansas play Kentucky, right? Or Kansas play Tennessee or whatever it is. So if you're Iowa State, if you're Kansas State, you're never going to get that marquee matchup, even if you are arguably the best team in your conference.
And respectfully, you shouldn't, because you're Kansas State and Iowa State. No one's watching you play. That's why the Big 12. That's why Kansas State and what game was on ESPNU the other night? Was it Kansas State?
Oh, I think Kansas State, Iowa State.
Yeah, Syracuse and North Carolina are on ESPN at the same time because more people are going to watch Syracuse and North Carolina. And even like today, even in this, like Texas and Tennessee, doesn't matter how good or bad those teams are. Kansas, Kentucky, if those 4 teams are not playing each other in some way, shape, or form, you've swung and missed on this event, because that's ultimately the point, is to get people to watch on Saturday afternoon. Yeah. And the unfortunate reality is that college basketball every single year becomes more niche. So the more chances you have to put the biggest brands together and make them play each other, that's good for the bottom line of college basketball. So, but like, I guess that is an unfortunate reality of being Kansas State. It doesn't matter how good you are, respectfully to Kansas State. It just doesn't. And the conferences would, I guarantee you, vote for better ratings than better games.
Yeah. And that's where I would love, to me, that's the benefit. That's why I would be for reorganizing this thing and taking that into consideration, but not predetermining based on, I have a fundamental issue with using preconceived notions to set this up. I understand why, 100%, right? It's about the money. It's the smart thing to do from a financial standpoint.
I'm not even sure it's preconceived notions.
Well, in terms of the
Kentucky,
brands.
Kansas and Kentucky being massive brands is, I guess, a preconceived notion, but not one that's going to change whether or not they're good or not.
Right. I meant preconceived notions in terms of quality, what's going to draw the most ratings.
See, I think that it's pretty rock solid that Kansas and Kentucky is going to bring the most ratings, regardless.
Right. That's what I'm saying, is that it's a preconceived notion from decades of data. Maybe that's not the correct term, but you're coming into the season going, okay, I don't care how good these teams are. These brands are who we want to put together because it's going to get the most eyeballs. That's what I get it. I just have an issue with it. That's fair.
But both teams were also ranked in the top 5 of the preseason.
Yes.
Or the top.
To be fair. Sure.
And Tennessee and Texas were the same way.
Yes.
So, no matter what, and Arkansas and Baylor were as well. You have 3 games that in theory were top 10 matchups.
Yeah.
And
and because the Big 12 is so good, you can't get this wrong, right? You're going to have good games because the Big 12 is the Big 12 and the SEC has multiple really good teams.
For sure. So 3 things that we're looking for. I suppose we've touched on some things that we're, subconsciously looking for already. But 3 things from each of us that we're looking for in the 10 game slate on Saturday afternoon. Before we actually dive into the 3, I want to set a base layer of, I've seen a lot of articles entitled something to the effect of, can the Big 12 cement itself as the best conference in college basketball? I've seen that multiple places.
What?
Mm-hmm. Can the Big 12 cement their supremacy as the best college basketball conference? That is not what this is about.
Yeah, by doing what? Winning the Big 12 SEC challenge?
Exactly. That was I think it was a Dallas publication, the Dallas News, maybe, that was the one I saw. And then I saw a couple of SB Nation articles that were kind of implying the same thing. So that's definitely not what this is about.
Nope.
if you're still questioning which conference is the best conference in college basketball, we might need to have a discussion, because that's not what this is about. But and sometimes it might be what this is about. I mean, it might be your chance to really, but there's no. I mean, 5 teams could fall off the face of the earth in the Big 12, and they would still have 5 teams that will rival the 5 best teams in any conference in the country. So that is just how good they are. Anyways, thought I'd mention that, because we are not going to have a conversation here about if the SEC can dethrone the Big 12. The Big 12 could go 0-10 on Saturday, and guess what? The Big 12 would still be the best conference in college basketball. Anyways, they're over 3 efficiency points at KenPom better than the second best team.
And especially this season, where there is no other obvious conference, right? It's not like you got a bunch of elite Big Ten teams.
No, you have
the
one
ACC's
Big
been
Ten team.
Right. The ACC's been fine.
The ACC's been
been
the ACC is 6th in the country. The ACC,
I guess, the bottom of that, Louisville's certainly dragging that down. Yeah, the bottom of that conference is pretty bad. That's true.
And all of the top
Florida
teams
State
are
was
a little like, are we sure any of those
teams
in the ACC have overachieved?
No, that's fair. Nobody's overachieved. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So maybe fine isn't even. Maybe it's closer to bad than fine. That's fair, right? SEC's been good. Mm-hmm. Not mind-blowingly good because of the expectations. More or less meeting expectations, I would argue. Maybe slightly underwhelming because of Arkansas's injuries, because of Kentucky, but Alabama also has exceeded. So SEC's been about what you would expect, and certainly we're not talking about the Pac-12. Yeah, there is no comparison. There is no conference making this interesting. So,
agreed. What's your first? What thing are you looking for first?
Yeah, let's start with the high-profile matchups. This is my first thing, specifically Texas, Tennessee, Kansas, Kentucky. I'm really interested because of kind of where these teams are at. Texas got 89 points against Oklahoma State after scoring 69, 67, and 72 in the 3 games before that. They haven't given up more than 75 since that Kansas State game where they couldn't stop anybody, though. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm fascinated by Texas' defense because as long as that defense is good, I'm holding out hope that they're going to end up being the team in the Big 12 best position for a deep NCAA tournament run. Can they keep this going defensively? And, of course, when you have these 2 teams match up and you don't really know what you're going to get from Texas on either end of the floor, right? They could be elite on both ends, elite on one end, good on both ends. It just kind of varies from game to game. And then you have Tennessee, where you know exactly what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. If Texas shows up defensively, can Tennessee score? This is going to be a really good test for Tennessee in terms of what you see in an Elite 8 matchup or something like that. And then on the other end, can Texas score against Tennessee's defense? So I really like this matchup in particular. And of course, it's the headliner in terms of, from a matchup standpoint, these are the best 2 teams who are playing each other.
I think Texas is one of those teams that Tennessee that is most threatening to Tennessee. I'll put it that way. Because do they have the guys offensively to score the basketball? Obviously. But they can also, on the right day, grind out a win with their defense. I mean, they have a 56-46 win this year. 69-61 on the road at West Virginia. Like they're capable of this kind of grinded out thing, because there are some teams that Tennessee's like that team's offense isn't good enough. We have the best defense in the country, and like unless there's a blue moon, this basketball team's probably not going to beat us. And then there are those teams that Tennessee, knows that, like, okay, on the wrong day, that team's gonna like explode offensively, and we're gonna have a hard time beating them. But if we kind of hit them in the mouth and make it a slow, grinded out game, that team is not going to be up for that kind of contest. And I think Texas has the ability to do both of those things.
Yep.
I mean, right? We're talking
That's
about
my whole theory on Texas. Yeah.
We're talking about a team that's scored 90 plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 times this year, and if you drop it just to 87, you add 6, 7, and 8 times. So that's a team, right? 13th in offense, 27th in defense. I think on the right day, certainly I think that defense is probably capable of more than being the 27th ranked defense in the country. 13's probably in a reasonable spot just because they do have some guards that at times get, Marcus Carr has some games where he's not exactly efficient. It wouldn't be how it would describe an offensive performance from him every once in a while. But I think, and if Tennessee's going to make a deep run, they'll have to beat a team like that at some point in the tournament, to your point. And that will be, and I think it'll be telling just kind of how they handle that. The other thing that I think is interesting about this is that like Marcus Carr, like that backcourt is about the worst backcourt I'd like to have my 5'9" guard try and be effective against. Like Marcus Carr and Tyrese Hunter. Of course, Tyrese Hunter is one of the best on-ball defenders in the country. Marcus Carr is just a physically gifted guard. He's a big physical guard.
Yep,
and
they're long.
Right. So Zakai Ziegler is going to have to be effective against guards like that in the tournament as well. So kind of within that conversation of the NCAA tournament, how does Ziegler look when it comes to being effective, running an offense, and just getting Tennessee into good offense as a team that like struggles to get into good offense sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And in fairness to Tennessee, the other thing I wanted to mention quick, take out the Kentucky game. They've scored at least 70 in 6 straight outside of that. So 6 of their last 7 overall. It has been pretty, and again, we've talked about this, right? 70 for Tennessee means something different than 70 for your average basketball team. So offensively, it has been pretty good and pretty consistent throughout SEC play, which is why they're, right up there near the top of the AP poll and looking really, really good.
And with all of that being said, because I think and this game would be a lot closer from a projection standpoint if it was on a neutral site, but the team that's second at KenPom is not Texas. The team that is projected to win the game by 8 is not Texas, right? So I also think that Texas winning this basketball game would say something about them as well. I think
sure.
I didn't want it to sound like that it's a foregone conclusion that Texas is going to win the basketball game and it's Tennessee that needs to prove things. Texas could also benefit from a win like this because when you break it down, right, they have that Gonzaga win at the very beginning of the season, but the 3 best teams they've played since then are Illinois, Kansas State, and Iowa State, and they've lost all 3. So Texas doesn't have, it's not like they're rolling in big time wins. And I think they have a Creighton win as well. So sorry, I forgot about the Creighton win. So like, it's not like they don't have them, but
this is something different.
Oh, and they did play TCU. I forgot about TCU. My bad. I overlooked that one. But the point still stands, and I don't think anybody is trying to argue that TCU is the same quality of team as Tennessee.
No, it's just exactly what you're getting from Tennessee, so it's kind of hard to sort of have a conversation about that, right? You just take it for granted because it's a compliment to them,
right?
That we don't need to explain to you why this is an incredibly difficult game for Texas to win. They're playing Tennessee. Enough said.
100%. The other big game. Let's just kind of let's go there because we'll just call this things number 1 I'm looking for. Is that fair? I wanted to talk.
These 2 were my first thing.
Okay, all right. Then we're on the same page there. This one is interesting because, and I believe you tweeted it from the Jays for Days Twitter account at Jays for Days Pod on Twitter, and maybe it was from your personal, but Kansas doesn't lose 3 straight games all that often, but they've also done it multiple times recently. And Kentucky quietly has righted the ship as of late. John Calipari's team has won 4 straight. Road win against Tennessee. Of course, that's the what in the world went on over there. But then they, and this is important because this isn't something that Kentucky was doing. They just went and beat the teams they were supposed to beat. They handled Georgia by 14. That game was sketchy for a little while. but eventually, and I think that was the game that Shibwe had like 32 and 25. Is that right? Yes, 37 and 24.
No.
Yeah, not
doing him a disservice there.
Yeah, my bad, Oscar Shibwe. I think the thing. So we have a team in Kentucky that I think everyone kind of had written off, and they've won 4 straight and righted the ship to a certain extent, as much as you can in a 4-game stretch. And 3 of those games are Georgia, Texas A&M, and Vanderbilt. But that's kind of where we were at with Kentucky at that point. And then you have a Kansas team that has lost 3 straight. So we can put this game in conversation about what's going to happen on the floor. What I'm curious about is the reaction to this game, like, depending on what the outcome is. Like, if Kentucky goes in there and gets smoked because it's Kansas at Fog Allen, how are we reacting to that? But if they go in and beat a team in Kansas that has lost 3 straight, and now it's Kansas losing 4 straight, is it, oh, Kentucky's back? Or is it more, do we need to sound the red alarms when it comes to Kansas? I think, on the surface, it's, man, if Kentucky wins this game, they're really back. But if Kentucky wins this game, it also means Kansas has lost 4 straight. And that really, really doesn't happen all that often. I'm just curious, first and foremost, what the reaction to this game is going to end up being. And if it's just a close win, what people decide that says more about.
And it is at Rupp, just to clarify.
Did I say at Kansas?
I believe so.
My bad. At Rupp.
So, no worries. Just, yeah. Absolutely. And that even makes it more interesting, right? Is that Kentucky gets this game at home. Because, yeah, you're not taking it. I don't care who it is. You're not taking anybody. You don't like anybody's chances winning at Fog Allen. This makes it a much more even matchup. And, yeah, the other part of this, to sort of continue that conversation, after this game, Kansas has Kansas State at home, Iowa State on the road, and Texas at home. Now, it's entirely conceivable that Kansas wins all 3 of those games. You would like their chances winning both of them at home. But if you lose this one, then all of a sudden you have to start beating the best teams in your conference, and you get them back to back to back right there.
Mm-hmm.
And not only that, right, you're also in danger of letting the Big 12 regular season title slip away, because if you lose these head-to-heads, somebody is, whether it's Texas, Iowa State, or Kansas State, is going to win enough games to kind of keep you at arm's length, unless you run the table the rest of the way or something like that. So, to me, this is more about Kansas, because Kentucky has finally beat a really good team with that Tennessee win. I would feel a little bit differently if they had gotten blown out again. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I'll say is, this is a really good matchup for Kentucky. Kansas doesn't have size. So kind of, again, looking to the NCAA tournament, what this could mean moving forward, since we actually get one of these, in the middle of the season instead of when everybody's still figuring out who they are in November and December. Oscar Tshiebwe should dominate this game. Kansas is not built to stop somebody like him. So that's kind of the matchup part of this. That,
just to clarify, nobody is built to stop Oscar Tshiebwe.
True.
But
that's fair.
Kansas especially.
Yeah. So, if it would be a huge win to continue this for Kentucky and to kind of rebuild this resume and put them in a better position come March in terms of seed lines. They've done enough, though, where they don't need this win. And not that Kansas needs it for, seeding's sake, but this gets real interesting if it's 4 in a row, and then that's the schedule you're coming back to off of this. And yeah, like you said at the beginning, the other thing I wanted to add to that is I kind of assumed it had been a while since Kansas lost 3 straight. So I started, going back, and I was going to find it by the time the game ended when it became clear they were going to lose again. And then I went, oh, right. It was 2 seasons ago when they had that, relative to Kansas, that quote unquote bad season where they were just kind of fine. They did have a 3-game losing streak in there. Now, it was a similar thing where it's not like they lost to bad teams. But this has now happened twice, and in between, of course, they won the national championship. But I am this is one of those that could have been, a very different conversation had Kansas won 2 of their last 3 and not been on this losing streak, and had Kentucky not turned things around. But the way that this set up and the timing of it was absolutely perfect to make this fascinating, even though it's not the game anybody expected it to be.
Yeah, 100%. And that's a good point about what actually is going to happen on the floor here. Is the first and foremost, I mean, can you stop Oscar Tshiebwe? And if the answer to that question is no, what you've seen on the floor from Kansas in the last week and a half would suggest that that's just like they're just not going to have enough offensively for Tshiebwe to have a crazy good game. Mm-hmm. And maybe they can overcome it, and perhaps that's the most effective thing that could happen for Kansas in this game is for them to have a hard time stopping Tshiebwe and Kentucky to put up a lot of points and them finding a way to win anyways by putting up some points of their own, because we're talking about 60 points against TCU and one of the worst losses that Bill Self has ever had at Fog Allen, followed by 69 points at Baylor. So at some point we need to right the ship here offensively from a balance perspective, and it being more than just Jalen Wilson, and or it could get out of hand if they're having a hard time stopping Tshiebwe.
Yeah, this is fascinating. These 2 matchups, outside of just the brands and the rankings and all of that, are absolutely fascinating to me, because I think we're going to learn a lot, and there are a lot of really interesting questions and storylines heading into both of them.
The other part, and then on the other side, like, can Kentucky stop Jalen Wilson, who's on a roll? Mm-hmm. And it's not like Kentucky has been lethal defensively this year. We're talking about 57th in the country in defensive efficiency, which is fine. But when you're talking about Power 5 conference teams, it's not great. And that guy's on a roll. That guy's on an absolute tear. And so just as, and of course he presents a different challenge than Oscar Tshiebwe does. And there's just some things you can do schematically defensively that might be more effective than the things you can do against Oscar Tshiebwe. I mean, maybe you just triple team him and dare him to make the right pass, which he doesn't always do, and dare Kentucky shooters to make the threes. I mean, that's probably where my defensive foundation for this game would be, is just, you're never going to touch the ball with less than 2 guys on you. And we'll see if you make the right pass, and we'll see if the guys in the corner make the shots. And if you do, we'll tip our cap and go back to Lawrence. But if you don't, then it might be a long day for Kentucky in the same way. But on the other end, Jalen Wilson is a dog and making a lot of tough shots and is a big defensive assignment for anybody. And that's no different on Saturday.
Yeah.
What's next for you?
Second thing, we kind of alluded to this earlier, but it's the bubble teams. Kentucky, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, West Virginia, Florida. No particular order. Just those 5 teams I'm looking at being right there in the bubble conversation. Some of them on the right side, some of them on the wrong side. Obviously, there's plenty of basketball still to be played. It's not like this is going to determine anything for anybody. But you look at some of these matchups, right? Kentucky, the opportunity to get a win against Kansas. Auburn is going to Morgantown. Oklahoma State has a home game they should win. And Florida's playing at Kansas State. Not a game you expect Florida to win, but that's the kind of win that changes your resume if you're Florida. A Florida team that has not had a good season and needs some help to get onto the right side of the NCAA tournament conversation. And then also, the other team I'm interested in here is Missouri. Lost 5 of 7. They've got wins over Illinois, Kentucky, and Arkansas. Right? Good, not great wins. None of those are really supposed to be able to anchor your resume. And none of those wins were on the road. So here come the Cyclones onto your court. The way that this all set up, it's not only that there are all these bubble teams, it's that most of them are playing games that maybe they're not expected to win. But it's another opportunity to get, these top 15, top 25 teams, most of them. It's that extra opportunity where it doesn't really hurt you if you lose, but if you win, It might be the difference between you making the NCAA tournament or not. It might be the difference between you avoiding, the first four or something like that. It could kickstart a nice little run that gets you into the 8-9 seed conversation, depending on how things go. There's a lot kind of at stake here and a lot of ramifications for all of these individual games, which is one of the things I love. There aren't very many of these where you kind of look at it and go, Texas Tech at LSU is probably the one. But outside of that, these games are incredibly important across the board for one team or the other, it feels like. So the bubble teams is the second part of this for me.
And that would go away if we decided on January 15th which teams were going to play which teams. Right? I mean, probably.
If you line it up, I'm not necessarily saying you got to line it up perfectly. I just think there could be a little bit of reworking so that.
Okay, so let me ask you this question: what would you change about this schedule to make it more well-rounded than it is right now? Because you just said, and we have Tennessee and Texas playing each other, Kansas and Kentucky playing each other, and Arkansas and Baylor is, it's still Arkansas versus Baylor. Baylor just beat Kansas.
Yeah.
And then you just said that 9 of the 10 games have intrigue in one way, shape, or form. So how would you make this better? Or do you really just want Kansas State or Iowa State to play a good team? Is that really just what you want?
That's a lot of it. Also, the other game I didn't mention, Oklahoma is welcoming Alabama. Mm-hmm. Obviously, that's a big resume builder there too.
Yeah.
I would like to see maybe just one or two, whether it's, Alabama, TCU, or Auburn, Kansas State. I would like one more ranked matchup. I think that's my biggest hurdle.
So if we just switched Oklahoma and Oklahoma and Iowa State, and you got Alabama playing Iowa State and Oklahoma playing Missouri, would you be okay?
I would feel better, yeah. Because again, that is another. Now it's not the same kind of quality win opportunity. Mm-hmm. But I guess what I want is a little bit more balance in terms of if you're Oklahoma and you're Missouri in that game, that is a game that helps you, right? It's kind of like another conference game. Mm-hmm. You're facing another NCAA tournament hopeful. It's not like you're playing a bad team. We don't really have any of those. Mm-hmm. It's kind of just, here's this team that is hoping to make the NCAA tournament that's kind of on the bubble, and here's this top 25 team that's having a great season. I would like to be able to learn a little bit more about, or can we get, maybe it's, you could switch Alabama and Florida, so Alabama's playing at Kansas State. Mm-hmm. I guess I want one more high-profile matchup in terms of how the season is going, as opposed to, I feel like we have the same thing over and over again. That's what I don't like, to answer your question. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. And I think that's fair.
Yeah, I want some of that, but not 5 games of that.
Sure.
I think there's a way you could, when you know kind of where everybody's at, you could organize it in a way where you get some high-profile brands, you get some high-profile matchups in terms of rankings, and you still keep it interesting where you're giving teams, the opportunity for these marquee wins that are kind of outside of your predetermined conference schedule. I think there's a way to do all of it, but I'm not uber passionate about this. I just thought it was an interesting point that I think would be fun to kind of get to create it. That's all.
The second thing for me is paying attention to where these games are being played, because of where these games are being played, there's a world in which the Big 12 gets just demolished. And all 4, like the 3 biggest matchups: Texas at Tennessee, Kansas at Kentucky, and there was one more. Maybe not. Am I bugging? I think I'm bugging. But those 2 games in particular, both of those games are at the SEC team. Mm-hmm. And then you have like Alabama's on the road at Oklahoma, and Auburn's on the road at West Virginia. So I just think it's interesting here, to keep in mind that winning road college basketball games is really difficult. I don't want to come, and we kind of touched on this anyways. But I don't want to come away from this thinking, is the Big 12 really as good as we thought they were because Texas lost at Tennessee and Kansas lost at Kentucky? Like that's a silly thing to come away with if both of those teams lose on the road to teams that were supposed to be, one of them is one of the 10 best teams in the country, and the other team was supposed to be one of the 10 best teams in the country. And then on the other side of it, like the other teams at the top of the SEC, I mean, like Alabama could go lose at Oklahoma. They could.
Absolutely.
Auburn could go lose at West Virginia. Like playing West Virginia at home is never a fun proposition. And like, that's an important thing to keep in mind here, that it doesn't necessarily, like the way the big games are kind of orchestrated, they could, like the Big 12 could come away losing most of them. And that doesn't necessarily mean anything for the conference as a whole, but the way it kind of shook out this year, and part of that's because some of the other big matchups that were supposed to be taking place are, Arkansas was supposed to be at Baylor. That was supposed to be a more important game, but it's not, just because, Arkansas is banged up and Baylor isn't quite as good as they were supposed to be. That's still a really good game, but those two marquee matchups, like the SEC could win both of them, and considering that they're both at home is an important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, and that goes nicely into my third kind of thing to watch for, which is basically just the odds on these games. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily a betting side, but I went to look at the KenPom win probabilities. And, Kentucky is favored. West Virginia is also favored. KenPom expects West Virginia to beat Auburn. And so all of a sudden, if those games tilt one way or another, we could be having a very different conversation about how this challenge ends up. Because despite the fact that Kansas is projected to lose, the Big 12 is still supposed to win 7 of these 10 games, according to KenPom. And also Texas is obviously supposed to lose. Right? Everything else, basically. Oh, and Alabama is the other SEC team projected to win. Other than that, Kansas State's supposed to win at home. Iowa State's supposed to win at Missouri. TCU is supposed to win at Mississippi State. Baylor's supposed to win at home against Arkansas. Texas Tech is supposed to win at LSU. And Oklahoma State is supposed to beat Ole Miss at home. Mm-hmm. Right? Those 6 games in particular, Kansas State, Iowa State, TCU, Baylor against a banged-up Arkansas, Texas Tech, and Oklahoma State should be wins for the Big 12. And then you get into, right, can Texas steal a game at Tennessee? Can Kansas go into Rupp and win? Can Auburn get a decent road win against West Virginia? Can Alabama pick up another quality win and beat another good team by, double digits like they seem to do every time they play? There's a world in which this is incredibly lopsided towards the Big 12, and there's a world in which, okay, let's say TCU loses to Mississippi State and Arkansas beats Baylor or something, and Tennessee and Kentucky hold serve at home. Now we're having a very different conversation. So I am very interested in that part of it, that KenPom is saying the home court, to your point, the home court advantage matters. And still, to our initial point about the Big 12 is supposed to handle business here.
Yeah, they should. They should handle business. But, with those two things kind of working in tandem together, it's hard to win college basketball games on the road. And just in the same way that I don't particularly care for making big declarations about a conference based on how they do in the NCAA tournament, I'm not all that interested in making big declarations about a conference because of how they performed in a one-day thing where they don't get to control the schedule. And right, it's just not the point of, I'm just not sure the point of these challenges is to decide which of the two conferences is better. Because if it was, then every team would play 3 games against another. There would be a 3-game every team would play 3 games against the other conference throughout the course of 10 days or whatever, then maybe we're talking about that kind of thing.
Or at least you would seed everybody, and the conference would get to pick who they want their number 1 team to be.
Ooh, that would be like a Ryder Cup thing? That would be lit. Wait, that would be so... Wait, hold on. It's a shame that this is going away with it now that you've manifested that into existence. That is a W idea. Let's just have each conference pick their 10 best teams and rank them from 1 to 10. And it's like this chess match thing, because that's what's happening in the Ryder Cup. Like, you both come with matchups, and you're kind of like reading and reacting to what the other captain has put out as their first match. I am all in on that. If we're gonna draft the NBA All-Star teams like moments before the game starts, we can definitely do that. Come on, that would be awesome. I'm in for that.
Right, because that's part of the difficulty with these conference battle challenge things is, what does it actually say if the 4th best team in the Big 12 loses on the road to the 6th best team in the SEC? How do you learn something about the top of the conference if the top of the conference isn't actually right? We would need Tennessee to play 4 or 5 different Big 12 teams to learn something from this. Because or Alabama. I forgot about Alabama, right? If you're not playing Alabama or Tennessee, if you're Texas, Iowa State, Kansas, TCU, it's not designed to determine who the best teams in the conference were. Otherwise, you would be looking at it and saying, okay, we're going to test the best against the best, and we're going to go from there, and it's going to be a question of depth. You put out your best teams against our best teams, and we're going to see, which 8th best team in the conference is better. This is just a kind of a mix of different things, which makes it fun. It's just, to your point, not designed to make some big commentary about the conference, because half the time it feels like, if it's close, the game that determines it is, with all due respect, Penn State at Georgia Tech or something. Mm-hmm. Which just doesn't have... I know Penn State's having a pretty good season, right? It just doesn't have a larger significance. It just happened to be the final win that the ACC needed or whatever.
Yep. My last thing is very specifically, the last time that Alabama went to Oklahoma, they lost. 2 years ago. Here's what the box score looked like. I mean, this is an Alabama team that was 9th at KenPom.
The really good Alabama.
Number 2, they finished 26-7. That year. That's a team that started in that game Joshua Primo, Alex Reese, Jaden Shackelford, John Petty, and Herb Jones. And that was an Oklahoma team that is better than this Oklahoma team is. I'm not going to act like this is quite the same conversation, but in a like the point I've gotten to with Alabama is, show me why you are different than the other good Alabama teams under Nate Oates.
Yep.
Show me why. Because, I mean, we talked about this, a good amount on the last podcast. But it is still a team that is dependent on the 3 almost to a fault. Live by it, die by it. And as we laid out in the last podcast, there are reasons to suggest that they're not quite as dependent on it as they once were, or as they were 2 years ago, but they still take a ton of threes, depend on the 3, and when they don't make them, it can get dicey against quality basketball teams. And Oklahoma is that. Oklahoma is a quality basketball team, and as you pointed to with the bubble stuff, Saturday's a really big day for the Oklahoma's NCAA tournament chances, because that is a statement, that is a win that you can build your resume around. That can be the pillar of your NCAA tournament resume. So they're going to be ready to go. And in that game in particular, I mean, that was an Alabama team that had a good offense, and they went in there and scored 61 points in Norman. So this is a very small but very specific way to compare Alabama of a few years ago to Alabama this year. And of course, Oklahoma's not the same team, and yada, 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 and all those things that I don't really need to say. But we are going to get a very similar situation, which I think is interesting. I also think it's interesting that twice in 3 years the same team is playing, that the two teams are playing each other in the same building that they did both times. I also find that a little interesting. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I'm assuming the other one was a part of the SEC Big 12 Challenge. I guess I don't know that for sure, but I'm assuming it was. It was on January 30th, 2021. So I mean, that would check out. So. That would check out last weekend of January.
I do love the idea of the Big 12 in particular playing in these kind of events in the middle of conference play, because it's just kind of this nice reminder to the rest of the country of, and to that game in particular, because we're probably going to get at least one of these where, and unfortunately the Big 12 doesn't have a lot of these bubble games at home, but take Baylor, for example, right? Would you be stunned if Baylor just handles Arkansas? No. Right? And would you be stunned if Oklahoma beat Alabama? No. And Oklahoma's, right, having not consistently winning Big 12 games because you're playing really good teams every single night. It's just, I enjoy the idea that the SEC and especially Alabama in this set of matchups gets a nice kind of welcome to the Big 12 and a reminder of how deep this conference is. That, right, there are 5, 6, 7 teams you would want to avoid ahead of Oklahoma in the Big 12, and still you want no part of that game whatsoever.
100%. It is it's one of those schedules that, like, okay, I could see that going either way. Like, of course you have the big games that we've already touched on, being whether it's based on current form or based on where the game is being played, and then even the little things like the fact that I was thinking Texas A&M. Never mind. There's so many maroon teams in the SEC. I was like, Mississippi State's pretty good this year. Mississippi State's not very good this year. I was thinking Texas A&M. I knew there was because the third ranked team. I mean, Texas A&M is 6-1 in conference, and that's the other part of this. Which teams are not playing in the SEC?
Yeah, that's the other thing. I would love the SEC to be able to pick their teams later too.
That would be. I'm more into that kind of thing.
I'm slowly turning you around on this.
No, you're not. Like the founding idea of we should wait, I'm against. So you're not turning me there. But if you were to try and convince me, the argument of, well, at least let the SEC pick which 10 teams they want to be a part of it, I might be able to get on board with that. Anywho, so Texas A&M isn't playing. Vanderbilt. Is South Carolina playing?
Nope.
And then
one more.
Do you know?
Georgia.
Are you? Did you know you were sitting there watching me struggle and you knew which 4 teams it was?
No.
I was about to say that was about to be real. Like, I was going to be a little upset if you were watching me struggle there. You just had the list of 4 teams right in front of you.
No, I was just confirming. I was going through them in my head as well and confirming because I reached South Carolina at the same moment you did.
Okay. Right,
yeah, the last one is Georgia. So Georgia, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, and Texas A&M.
Now, why is Texas A&M?
There are 14.
Yeah. Like the other 3, okay. Like, and clearly there's some like, okay, those 3 teams are going to be bad. Let's not put them in here. But it's not like Texas A&M didn't start as a top 50 KenPom team.
Yeah.
Don't worry, we get the 12-8 LSU Tigers. Go Tigers! Go Tigers! You think you get hit in Baton Rouge at this point if you say that? You think they are? Do they stand at Orgeron in Baton Rouge still? What do you think?
I mean, the man won a national title.
Yeah, but like my 9-year-old Shih Tzu could have won a national title with that roster. And listen, Toby is a hell of a coach. Okay, so let's not get it messed up. Toby is him on the sidelines, but like, am I confident with the support of some coordinators could have won a national championship at LSU that year? 1,000%. Right? I mean,
yeah. Yeah, no, I'm with you.
This
I'm not
more,
saying they won because of it.
This is more of a like, because it like, right, I'm remembering correctly that it ended weird, right?
Yeah. Nah, see, I think because he won the Natty, I think it's all.
And Ed Orgeron has to be like one of those like drunk college students have to eat up at Orgeron.
Right. Even though it was kind of there were some not so great things that happened. Yeah, it just the overall vibes of him to me. I still think there's a soft spot in LSU. Maybe I'm wrong, but there's a soft spot in every LSU fan, or at least most LSU fans' hearts for just that era of LSU football.
I think you're right. That's got to be, to talk about the easiest jobs in sports. I think Ed Orgeron coaching the LSU Tigers in 2019 was like top 5 easiest coaching jobs in the 2010s. That's a fun game. That's a fun game. Who else is on that list?
Oh, I mean Alabama.
Right, it's got to be Saban, and across any sports. So I think Saban.
Oh.
I mean, it could Warriors. Be Saban, but Steve Kerr was the next name in my mind. I don't think Andy Reid is allowed to be on that list because I think Andy Reid is in a lot of ways very much responsible for how good Patrick Mahomes has gotten so quickly, and especially the Super Bowl that they won. I don't know. I don't really feel like thinking that hard about it. I mean, if Scott Drew didn't pull Baylor out of the grave the way that he did and just deserves credit for everything good that happens to Baylor, maybe you talk about Baylor and that team that they put together. But also there's and I suppose you could say the same about Orgeron, but the recruiting, going and finding Davion Mitchell and Jared Butler and MaCio Teague, at the JUCO level, not all of those guys, but was impressive. Of course, I'm not actually belittling the job that coaches are doing on really good basketball and football teams, but it's an interesting conversation. Steve Kerr could have been tied to his chair because of his back all year, and they still would have. What did they go 16-1 in that playoffs?
Yeah, something like that. I'll throw the Dodgers in there too.
Okay. Well, this opens up a can of worms that I just find managers to be a net negative in any way. Like, if anything, they are a net. Like if we're talking about the manager, you've done something wrong.
Sure, right. Dave Roberts is never going to get any credit for doing anything. He's just going to get all the blame.
Yeah, when was the last time you heard somebody say, "Man, that was a really well managed game from X"? No, it's always like, man, Francona and Joe Madden, in Game 7 of that World Series, like, made some interesting decisions with their pitching rotation and things, and like that game was chaotic because of the rain and because like both guys were trying to hand the other manager a World Series. But I digress. Go Tigers! Maybe we'll. That's where all this started. That poor LSU was getting ricochet shots as the 121st ranked KenPom team participating in this event instead of the 36th ranked KenPom team.
They got a shot to prove you wrong on Saturday.
The last thing I'll say is that according to KenPom, the SEC has the 2 best teams in this event, and it's not particularly close. 2 and 4.
I would agree with that.
Kansas is 9.
I would have flipped.
Sorry,
them.
Texas is 9. Kansas is 10. Sure. But
yeah,
for what
but 100%. Those are the best 2 teams in this. Yeah. Now the Big 12 has the next
5.
Yeah. At least 4.
That's interesting. So in your power rankings of this event, if you were to rank the 20 teams, the SEC would have the 2 top teams right now. Is that how you would do it?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Without hesitation.
I'm a little surprised by that. I'm not gonna lie, a little bit surprised.
And then it would be some iteration of Kansas State, Iowa State, TCU, Kansas, and then probably Baylor,
and then Arkansas.
Well, something. Auburn's there.
Yeah, but Auburn just got handled by Texas A&M at home.
Yeah.
Shouts to Texas A&M. I don't know. Are we sure Auburn's that good? Are we positive that Auburn's that good?
No.
Georgia, USC, and Memphis losses this year. No.
Yeah. But to your point, yeah, 100%. It's 2 and then it's 4 and then you can have a conversation.
You got anything else?
Oh, wait, is it? And Texas. No, it's 5. Kansas State, Iowa State, TCU, Kansas, Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now that we've clarified that, I forgot. I apologize, Texas. I forgot. Now I'm done.
In true Jays for Days fashion, we've managed to turn this, probably 41-minute podcast into an hour long. But that is what.
All because you said go Tigers.
Go Tigers. Thank you. Please subscribe to the Jays for Days podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at Jays for Days Pod, YouTube, TikTok, all of those fun things. We'll be back on Monday. Hopefully we have reasons to talk about the Big 12 ACC Challenge. I find it hard to believe there won't be reasons to talk about the SEC Big 12 Challenge. We'll talk about that and anything else that might be worthy of conversation on Monday. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of the Jays for Days podcast. I'm Josh. He is also Josh, and we will see you later.